click to subscribe. I've got some breaking news. It's kind of a last-minute episode that I'm throwing together because of this information that I've been able to confirm.
Subscribe right now. Hit that notification bell. Turn on every
The digital footprint of a modern crime scene leaves behind a trail that absolute silence can never truly erase. For 5 agonizing months, the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie from her home in the quiet, upscale expanses of the Catalina Foothills has existed within a profound, terrifying vacuum. It is an investigation defined by its lack of visible answers, by a masked shadow captured on a porch camera deliberately blocking out the lens with the leaves of a nearby potted plant, and by a family forced to broadcast their private torment to the entire world, in the desperate hope that a single line of communication might open. When you systematically strip away the noise generated by a digital opportunist, you are left staring directly into the dark, unresolved core of the primary investigation. The conviction of the Hawthorne impostor formally closed a single file on a prosecutor's desk, but it did absolutely nothing to alter the grim reality that Nancy Guthrie has been missing for over 150 days. For more than 5 months, an 84-year-old grandmother, mother, and prominent matriarch has been completely separated from her loved ones. Her sudden disappearance has left behind a profound void that a $1 million reward fund has yet to fill. To understand the true trajectory of this active case, you have to look past the actions of the copycat and analyze the incredible discipline, forensic strategy, and emotional resilience displayed by the Guthrie family as they navigate an investigative landscape cluttered with false leads. Throughout this agonizing timeline, the conduct of Nancy Guthrie's children has been remarkable. In many high-profile missing persons investigations, the overwhelming weight of public scrutiny and prolonged media attention can easily cause a family to spiral into chaotic speculation or counterproductive media campaigns. But the Guthrie family has maintained an ironclad level of composure that legal analysts and crisis negotiators view as a masterclass. Every single time they have stepped onto a national television platform, they have done so with a highly calculated, deliberate purpose. They have consistently aligned their messaging with the strategic needs of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Pima County Sheriff's Department, treating their public visibility not as an outlet for grief, but as a live, functioning investigative tool designed to keep a specific door open. That strategy was illuminated with absolute clarity when Nancy's daughter, Savannah Guthrie, went on the air to make a profound public admission. She stated openly to the country that she believed the 2 original ransom notes received by her family in the immediate aftermath of the abduction could be completely legitimate. To grasp the immense psychological weight of making that statement on national television, you have to understand the calculated risk involved. By publicly validating those specific demands, the family was making a conscious decision to lean entirely into hope, choosing to treat the terrifying prospect of direct contact with the abductors as a real operational reality. But there is a problem with that communication stream. The alternative option, completely dismissing incoming communications as a default defensive measure, risked slam-shutting the single digital channel their mother might be behind. It was an act of profound vulnerability, a signal sent directly into the shadows to tell the real captors that the family was still listening, still rational, and still entirely prepared to cooperate to secure her safe return. It was precisely this carefully maintained openness that the digital parasite in California decided to weaponize. Kala did not merely commit a technical violation of federal telecommunications law. He launched a direct, targeted attack against the family's point of maximum emotional vulnerability. Now here's where things get complicated. By engineering a virtual text message that perfectly mirrored the cryptocurrency premise of the original February 2 demand, Kala forced a grieving family through a devastating artificial cycle of hope and psychological collapse. He intentionally polluted the exact communication stream that federal cyber agents were fighting to keep clean, forcing the FBI to divert elite tracking resources away from the hunt for the real perpetrators just to neutralize a manufactured hoax. This is why the Department of Justice treated his actions with such immense severity, refusing to view it as a mere digital prank, and instead prosecuting him under the precise banner of a grief profiteer. Then there's this detail regarding the remaining ransom communications in this case. In the high-stakes environment of a federal kidnapping investigation, the line between an authentic demand and an extortionate hoax is the single most critical boundary on the evidence board. Just one day prior to the impostor entering his guilty plea in Tucson on July 2, 2026, the FBI's Phoenix field office issued a highly significant, meticulously worded public statement that drew a sharp line down the center of the case files. The federal government announced in writing that while certain ransom communications had been officially analyzed and deemed complete litigation, so illegitimate extortion attempts, other specific demands may potentially be legitimate and are actively being investigated as such by elite forensic teams. According to a simultaneous report carried by the global news agency Reuters, a high-ranking federal asset had indicated that 3 specific kidnapping notes highlighted in recent media coverage, including the 2 initial demands sent to media outlets and a third document that surfaced much later, were entirely fraudulent. This apparent contradiction created an immediate state of friction within the true crime community, leaving the public to wonder if the federal government was suffering from internal communication failures. But a sophisticated look at the mechanics of federal intelligence reveals that these 2 pieces of data are not necessarily mutually exclusive. The legitimate communications referenced by the FBI's official written statement may simply be heavily guarded assets that have never been leaked to the public, existing entirely within a classified perimeter, while the unverified, highly publicized media notes are systematically picked apart by independent analysts. Reportedly, the first note sent to a local television station on February 2 laid the initial groundwork for the entire extortion profile, claiming that Nancy Guthrie was completely safe and demanding an immediate transfer of cryptocurrency to a specific Bitcoin wallet address for her release. But the second communication, described by multiple individuals familiar with the active matter, took a hostile turn, explicitly indicating that the 84-year-old matriarch had already lost her life. We must stress with absolute clarity that this remains unverified, attributed reporting regarding the raw contents of an unauthenticated document. No federal official or local sheriff's deputy has ever stood before a microphone and stated that detail as a confirmed medical or investigative fact. The family itself continues to move forward and speak with an unyielding belief that their mother is still alive, refusing to allow unverified digital terror to dictate the terms of their search. The unmasking of the California copycat proved that the digital tracing systems work with terrifying speed, but it left the ultimate question unanswered. The noise has been cleared, and the impostor is heading to sentencing on September 10th. But the real shadow captured on that doorbell camera is still out there, and the FBI is still reading the notes. What do you think is the most telling piece of evidence remaining in the active search for Nancy Guthrie? If you possess any information at all, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant it may appear, regarding the physical disappearance or the ongoing investigation of Nancy Guthrie, you are urged to immediately contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation or the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Please consider subscribing to this channel right now so you do not miss our continued grounded coverage as new court documents are released. Turn on your notifications, share this video, and keep the Guthrie family in your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and please stay safe. The transition from a high-profile federal arrest to a definitive courtroom conviction is rarely a straight line, especially when the eyes of an entire nation are tracking every single legal filing. When Derek Anthony Calla was taken into custody by federal agents in Hawthorne, California, the public narrative surrounding the Nancy Guthrie investigation experienced a moment of intense friction. To the outside observer, the speed of the arrest felt like a total victory. But inside the Department of Justice, federal prosecutors were quietly preparing for a high-stakes legal chess match. They understood that while the digital evidence against this 42-year-old man was absolutely overwhelming, the nature of his crime required a highly precise legal strategy. They needed to secure total accountability for the torment inflicted on the Guthrie family, but they had to do so without compromising the active, ongoing hunt for Nancy Guthrie's actual abductor. When the formal indictment was brought against Calla in the Federal District Court of Arizona, prosecutors initially leveled 2 heavy counts against him. Count 1 was a massive federal felony, transmitting a demand for ransom in interstate commerce. This is a charge specifically preserved for high-tier extortion plots carrying severe statutory penalties because it targets the actual act of demanding financial gain under the threat of violence or continued captivity. Because Kala pressed send from his home in Southern California and the text messages crossed state lines to reach family members tied to an active Arizona kidnapping investigation, the interstate commerce requirement was met the exact second his virtual phone line hit the cellular towers. Count 2 targeted the psychological method behind his actions, utilizing a telecommunications device with the intent to abuse, threaten, or harass a person without disclosing his true identity. This charge was engineered to penalize the digital mask itself, the deliberate use of an application to impersonate a criminal syndicate and shatter the emotional stability of private citizens. For weeks, the case appeared to be barreling toward a massive public trial in Tucson, with a firm date initially set for late June. But there is a problem with taking a hoax case of this magnitude all the way to a public trial. For the FBI agents still actively hunting for Nancy Guthrie, a public trial meant taking the witness stand and exposing the specific, highly sensitive methods they use to intercept, trace, and analyze anonymous digital communications. If the real kidnappers were watching, and investigators must always assume they are, a public trial risked providing them with a masterclass in how to avoid the FBI's digital traps. Sometime before that June trial date arrived, a complex plea agreement was reached between the defense and the United States Attorney's Office, completely altering the legal resolution of the hoax case. Now here's where things get complicated. When the final details of that plea agreement were read aloud in the Tucson courtroom, many headline watchers were surprised to learn that Derek Kala did not actually plead guilty to the flagship charge of transmitting a ransom demand. Instead, the legal framework was strategically shifted. Kala entered a plea of guilty to 2 distinct counts of telephonic harassment, one count representing each individual member of Nancy Guthrie's inner circle that he had directly targeted on February 4th. The high-tier ransom transmission charge was completely resolved and absorbed through this plea agreement. To a casual observer, this might look like a legal compromise, but a deeper look into the strategy reveals that prosecutors got exactly what they wanted. A ransom transmission conviction legally categorizes an individual as a financial extortionist. A telephonic harassment conviction in a federal kidnapping context states something far more precise for the historical record. It legally labels the defendant as a calculated tormentor of a shattered family. It stripped away any false mystique of a criminal mastermind and exposed him as a pure psychological predator. Then there's this detail regarding the statutory exposure for these crimes. Each count of telephonic harassment carries a maximum penalty of up to 2 years in a federal penitentiary, a $250,000 fine, or both, followed by a mandatory period of supervised release. But the true shockwave of the hearing came when media outlets began reporting the specific sentencing recommendations contained within the signed plea deal. The agreement calls for Kala to serve 5 years of probation, with the sentences for both counts running concurrently. The prospect of an individual avoiding immediate prison time after weaponizing a family's deepest agony caused an immediate wave of intense public debate. True crime analysts and legal experts immediately began dissecting whether the judicial system was treating a horrific act of emotional cruelty too lightly. But in the federal system, a plea agreement is never a final guarantee. The recommendation of probation is merely a proposal resting on a wooden bench, entirely subject to the absolute discretion of a United States district judge. When Derek Kala returns to that Tucson courthouse on September 10th for his formal sentencing hearing, he will be standing before Judge John C. Hindracker, a jurist known for his meticulous evaluation of the total circumstances surrounding an offense. Judge Hindracker will have the complete pre-sentence investigation report in front of him, a document that outlines not just the cold facts of the digital trace, but the profound human collateral damage left in the wake of the crime. Under federal law, the victims of a crime possess an absolute statutory right to be reasonably heard at a sentencing proceeding, whether through a written victim impact statement or a direct address to the court. But if the court was looking for a clear window into the true character and lack of discipline defining the defendant, it did not have to wait for a pre-sentence report. The recent plea hearing itself took an entirely unexpected and chaotic turn that laid Derek Kala completely bare. During the standard proceeding, federal prosecutors revealed a startling breach of protocol. While out on a $20,000 bond awaiting the resolution of his case, Kala had completely violated the strict conditions of his pretrial release. Forensic drug screenings revealed that he had tested positive for controlled substances, with Kala himself admitting under oath that he had consumed drugs as recently as 4 days prior to standing before the federal judge to enter his guilty plea. This admission immediately introduced a critical legal question into the middle of the proceeding. In the United States federal court system, a guilty plea is only legally valid if the defendant enters it knowingly, voluntarily, and with an absolutely clear head. A judge cannot accept a conviction from an individual whose cognitive faculties are actively impaired by recent substance use. Judge Hinde Racker was forced to halt the standard script and question the defendant directly, demanding to know if he was currently under the active influence of any substances during the actual court proceeding. Kala, flanked by his defense counsel, maintained that he was entirely sober for the hearing itself, and both the prosecution and the defense formally agreed that he was not too impaired to make a binding, clear-headed legal decision. The plea was allowed to move forward, but the damage to his credibility was absolute. He had arrived at the most serious day of his life, facing federal convictions for harassing a missing person's family, with the evidence of his own reckless choices still actively processing through his system. This chaotic scene provides the ultimate analytical blueprint for understanding the true nature of the digital hoaxes that frequently contaminate high-profile investigations. The public often imagines that anonymous threats and fake ransom notes are the work of highly organized, deeply calculating criminal actors operating out of sophisticated networks. The reality, as exposed in that Tucson courtroom, is frequently far more pathetic. The individual who sent those text messages was not a criminal mastermind running a shadow operation from California. He was an undisciplined opportunist who sat in his room, watched a national tragedy unfold on his television screen, and decided to use a free digital application to experiment with human suffering. He left a trail that a first-year federal agent could easily walk backward in a single afternoon. Yet he possessed the absolute cruelty required to pretend he held the key to a mother's life. For the past 5 months, the disappearance of 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie from her upscale home in the Catalina Foothills has existed within a profound, terrifying vacuum. It is an investigation defined by its lack of visible answers. The only early clue was a masked shadow captured on a porch camera, an individual who deliberately blocked out the lens with the leaves of a nearby potted plant before Nancy vanished into the desert night. When a crisis reaches that level of national saturation, it creates a magnetic pull for the public, inspiring thousands of tips and community search grids. But within the darker corners of the internet, that level of high-profile vulnerability acts as a beacon for a completely different kind of individual. It attracts predators who do not want to help solve the mystery, but who see an opportunity to feed on the desperation of a family running out of time. On a recent morning inside a federal courtroom, the vast machinery of the United States justice system finally brought one of those digital threads to an absolute, unyielding stop. There were no flashing cameras allowed inside the proceeding, and no dramatic showdown. Instead, a 42-year-old man named Derek Anthony Kala stood before a federal judge in Tucson, Arizona. Resting on the defense table was a heavily detailed plea agreement, sealing a guilty plea to federal charges of telephonic harassment. The headlines immediately flashed across the country with breaking news updates, declaring that the FBI had finally convicted a man associated with the Nancy Guthrie ransom notes. But as the ink dries on those court documents, a much larger, far more unsettling reality is beginning to take shape. To truly understand the gravity of what occurred in that courtroom, you have to look directly into the massive analytical space between what this man actually did and what the federal government now proves he was completely incapable of doing. While investigative journalists like Brian Entin had been tracking the quiet chess match between federal cyber analysts and the anonymous senders targeting the Guthrie family, the arrest of Kala at his residence in Hawthorne, California, brought a wave of collective relief that proved to be premature. The immediate assumption by many was that the mastermind behind the abduction had finally stepped out of the shadows. But there is a problem with that narrative. Federal prosecutors almost immediately introduced a phrase into the public record that shifted the entire trajectory of the case. They did not call him a kidnapper. They did not label him a suspect in the physical abduction that occurred on the night of January 31. Instead, The United States Attorney's Office described him with a term that carries a deeply chilling psychological weight. They called him a grief profiteer. Now here's where things get complicated. To comprehend how the FBI managed to unravel this specific thread in under 24 hours, while the primary kidnapping investigation remains completely unsolved, you have to dissect the exact mechanics of the digital trap this individual set for himself. The story begins on February 4th, just a few days after Nancy Guthrie vanished. The investigation was still in its infancy. Local sheriff's deputies were still processing the physical evidence near the front porch, and the Guthrie family was operating under an unimaginable cloud of shock. In a moment of raw public vulnerability, Nancy's children stood together to record a deeply emotional video message that was broadcast across major television networks. In that video, they spoke directly to the anonymous figures who had previously sent a cryptocurrency ransom demand through a local television station's online tip portal on February 2nd. The family openly stated that they had received the message, understood the demands, and were fully prepared to cooperate and pay whatever cryptocurrency sum was required to ensure their mother's safe return. They were publicly begging for a lifeline. Then there's this detail. In Hawthorne, California, Derek Calla was watching that exact news coverage from his computer screen. He did not see a family shattered by grief. He saw a unique analytical opening. Using an online database, he tracked down the private contact information of two individuals within Nancy Guthrie's immediate inner circle. He then opened a virtual telephone application, a voice-over internet protocol system designed to generate anonymous, temporary phone numbers completely uncoupled from a physical SIM card or a traditional cellular carrier. To an amateur user, this type of technology feels like an impenetrable digital mask, allowing someone to press send from the comfort of their own home while appearing to exist anywhere else in the world. With his virtual number established, Calla composed a brief, highly calculated text message and sent it directly to the family members' personal devices. The content of that text message was explicitly engineered to mimic the authentic language of a professional extortion plot, asking a direct, terrifying question: "Did you get the Bitcoin? We are waiting on our end for the transaction." The phrasing of that message was intentionally plural. By using the words "our end" instead of "my end," the sender was deliberately trying to convince the terrified family that they were dealing with an organized criminal syndicate holding their 84-year-old mother hostage. It directly capitalized on the specific details that had already leaked into the media regarding the original Bitcoin wallet address. According to investigators, Calla did not stop at a text message. A few minutes later, he utilized the same application to place a direct voice call to one of the family members. The call lasted for exactly 9 seconds. In the realm of cellular data analysis, 9 seconds is an incredibly brief window of time, barely long enough for a frantic relative to answer, utter a desperate hello, and listen to the heavy, chilling silence on the other end, before the line abruptly goes dead. It is a tactic designed to maximize psychological distress, leaving the recipient suspended in a state of absolute terror. But while those 9 seconds were weaponized to inflict maximum emotional damage on a grieving family, they simultaneously acted as a fatal operational error for the sender. He believed he was playing a high-stakes psychological game with private citizens who were completely defenseless. In reality, the moment he pressed send on those text messages, he was actively communicating with the combined forensic intelligence of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Phoenix and Tucson divisions, who had already established a command post inside the family's lives. The virtual phone number hid his physical location from a standard smartphone screen, but it left an absolute paper trail within the data servers of the service provider. Every voice-over internet protocol account must be registered to an active email address, and every email address logs the specific internet protocol addresses used to access it. The FBI did not need to engage in a complex, multi-week tracking operation across the dark web. They simply issued emergency federal subpoenas to the technology corporations involved. Within less than 24 hours of the text messages appearing on the Guthrie family's phones, cyber analysts had traced the digital infrastructure straight back to a Google account registered under Calla's actual legal name, pointing directly to a specific residential internet router in Los Angeles County. When an FBI tactical team moved in to execute a federal search warrant at that Hawthorne residence on February 5th, They did not find a sophisticated command center, blueprints, or evidence of a physical abduction. They found a man sitting in front of ordinary consumer electronics, completely detached from the physical reality of the crime that had occurred hundreds of miles away in Arizona. The resolution of this hoax case resolved a massive spike of noise within the investigation, but it left the central, terrifying question completely untouched. If this 42-year-old man was merely a digital copycat who weaponized the idea of a Bitcoin ransom to torment a family, then who is the entity behind the original demands? Who is the true masked figure who stood on the porch in the Catalina Foothills before Nancy Guthrie vanished from the face of the earth?